Thank you very much, first of all, for having me here. It's been a quite delicious conference so far. I think the big themes that have been coming through of memorialisation are applying right across Europe. And certainly for the module which I'm developing for next year, there's so many ideas, and so many of your works here are probably going to be recommended reading to students. Lovely as well for me, who some people here will know better from Iron Age equestrianism, that the themes of chariotry, the interaction of the horse, also the horse's psychopomp in many ways, seems to be coming across very strongly. And it's lovely to know that you're not on your own doing this out in this wee corner of the of Western Europe. So without any further ado, I'm going to get on with this. Just if anybody has questions at the end, just to say to you, I'm partial hearing, so shout, because if I can't see your mouth moving, I could have problems hearing you. Thank you. Okay. I have just started. This is very much based upon a new IRC project, which I have been funded to carry out by the Government of Ireland Irish Research Council, which I'm going to be doing in UCD. Much of it really involves the questions which sprung up at the end of my thesis. My thesis ended up with more questions at the end of it than it had any answers. We got some, but not as many as I would personally have liked. Anybody who tells you that they can give you an absolute chronology for when the early Iron Age starts in Ireland is either deluding themselves a wee bit, or they're making it up to sound cool. We don't know. And with that difficulty of chronology is the thing which I think I wanted to address more than anything else, because without chronology, you've got all these wonderful pieces, but they don't make a picture. And we can't really start to put things in any form of order as you've got here within Europe. So the project looks to find material culture and chronology. What's being deposited where? What objects are being made of? Is there a pattern of choice for what you make an object of, alloy-wise? And where can we start to see the wobbles of change within society? And possibly most importantly, when? And perhaps if we look at those technological horizons, which obviously exist, hopefully we'll be able to start to see exactly where the late Bronze Age segues into the early Iron Age, and we're bound to have a Middle Iron Age, but nobody can give you an exact date for it. There's been 6 or 7 versions. I tend to go with the rafteries, but there's always new ideas coming up. But what I'm looking for are to actually look for where the metals change, where the objects change, and basically where any form of social change happens in conjunction with this. So that's the background of the project, which is called Making Time. It is 2 months old, so what you're getting here is very much the raw, big picture that I've been working on like crazy for this. I'm trying my best here. So this presentation will look at burial in Ireland's Iron Age. And why is there such little evidence? Matt was saying about the problem of it in Britain as a whole for the early Iron Age. We have it right through. And about what glimpses of society the Iron Age can actually provide, burials, etc. And also then some throwing out ideas more than anything for the possible reasons for the paucity of evidence that we have. So obviously, as you know, we are clinging there to the western edge of Europe, where a lot of European ideas persisted a long time after Europe's mainland had changed. We see symbols being reimagined. We see this with Britain as well, where it's a time, the end of the Iron Age is a time of reimagining Latin imagery. A lot of it gets stripped down and refined, and always with regional twists. And the picture there shows some of the objects from Ireland, just to point out, which we are finding out that the majority of these, with the exception perhaps of the spoon, there are probably 1st to 2nd century AD, because they're coming up big howling PXRF of brass. The wee arrowhead there is a subject of a paper I'm working on at the moment. It's a fascinating thing, which may be much later as well. So we've got a lack of early Iron Age burials in Ireland. We've got a lack of every kind of Iron Age burial in Ireland. So we don't really know what's happening in that transition between the very last gasps of the Bronze Age and the beginning of the Iron Age. So first of all, to backtrack, the Bronze Age is equally the Late Bronze Age, which obviously is your Hallstatt into Latin, early Latin. You've got construction and style of the graves very widely. You get kists and pits and some of these things. You've got almost Urnfield type. They're obviously in homage to Urnfield burials that you're actually finding in some places. And these tend to get reused over and over and over again until Christianity comes. And they encourage, of course, the faithful to come into the churchyard. You control them in death as much as life. But the Iron Age is much more problematic because we don't really have any idea of what's going on. And that's slightly strange because it's a period in Ireland that is obsessed by identity. The identity of the elite by the end of the Iron Age is incredibly complex. I'm not the only person who holds 2 passports. There's many others in the past have done basically the same. They are also obsessed by genealogy. You just have to read the Annals of the Four Masters, which are early medieval recorded texts of much, much older stories, which unfortunately have lots of layers of all sorts of things on top of them, which you have to peel back to try and actually find where your old stuff actually is. So for a period that is obsessed by family, and one of you was mentioning earlier that family and relatives and followers were more important than anything, it's very much the same, I would imagine, for us, based upon what the old mythologies are. But there's very scant evidence of what burial practices are going on at any phase. You have 1 or 2 really good ones where we can say, aha, but then there are exceptions to the rule. So, what we can do, well, what I tried to do, was to go through any of the grey literature we have to get an idea of what selection we have of burials for the late Iron Age. We have ring barrows, such as the big one at Granagh. That's one of the finds there at the bottom in the colour picture. You've got ring ditches like Ballydavis down in County Laois. You've got mounds and embanked enclosures, although they're problematic because quite often you'll find the goodies, but there's no human remains, even cremations. You will find cremations and interments in pits. The Colloque, which is one that particularly interests me because I've spent a wee bit of time before I took up the postdoctorate position trying to track down as to where it may be. It was an antiquarian excavation, and they were none too fussy or fancy about the translation of where they thought that they were actually excavating. So it could be Colloque, it could be a selection of places, but I think I've got it down to within about 700 metres, more on that much later. And then you get cremated and placed in pre-existing tumuli, and you see this, of course, across Europe. You see it certainly in Britain, where you get the very old Neolithic cairns, etc. There's this, I think Ian Armit had covered this much better than anything I could by saying about they want legitimacy. Whoever is around at the end of the Iron Age want to be legitimised by saying that we're just like these people who were here years and years ago. So they place the remains there, but they may have very little to do with it. We really don't know. A good example of that, of course, is Knockmany and, of course, Tara. Tara's probably one of the most important palimpsests that we probably have. And then you've got the problematic one, which is the excarnation and dispersal of cremated remains. And I'm putting a question mark at that one because that might be our way forward at looking at Iron Age burials as a whole. So what do we know about people of the Iron Age as a whole? Well, exactly like over in here in Europe, they liked their warfare, they liked their beautiful weapons, they liked to party. We don't have anything as beautiful as Vix or Hochstorf, but we've got obviously cauldrons, great big beefy cauldrons. They liked horse riding. We know from all of the tack that has been found, and believe me, it's apart from about one or two, which are suspect from being a wee bit earlier, they're all 1st century and a wee bit further on. And they liked to show themselves off. They liked to look good in gorgeousness. And grave goods like Colloque only include very small personal objects, what I've called micro hoards. And of course, there's always the temptation to look at these tiny hoards as being something that you're going to be putting in for recycling. But believe me, you wouldn't get much metal from these because they're so tiny. You get maybe a spearhead, a snaffle, part of a snaffle, maybe a Y piece, maybe a fibula, and that's it. It's all very, very small potatoes compared to what you see here in Europe. Now, the first thing I wanted to ask was, where are they found? And could these things actually indicate burials where maybe the ashes had been dispersed off years ago? So we've got no template, we've got no anything to go by. So I fell back on the thesis, which had been put pretty thoroughly to find out. Obviously, you're saying here that equestrian equipment is featured in a number of your presentations today, and I've been sitting smiling at the back. That you found them in burial contexts, the great big buckets and all the rest of it, obviously with us, and there's been others that have been the same. And I wanted to see that the depositions that we were looking at, were they being treated in the same way as Europe? Because over here you're getting maybe a nice spearhead put in a bucket, you're getting a nice piece of tack being put in, you're having maybe some brooches, some rings, whatever. So I wanted to see back in PhD exactly where the find spots were and what kind of landscape did they belong in. And you'll see there from the wee graph, Commonage and Peat Bog are your two big, they slug it out basically for where most pieces of equestrian equipment found. Peat Bog, of course, just to point out, the find spots of all of these things have had little to do with 20th century roads from the Celtic Tiger era, or even the Victorian railroads, because I went through that. Most of these have been random finds through bog drainage of the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, and also just ploughing up land. So there's been, whenever I say folkloric associations, I mean things that are connected with mythologies and all the rest of it. Whenever I say heroic associations, sites that have heroic associations, I'm talking about where in the Annals of the Four Masters and all of the Dinshenkas, etc., where there's related to battles, contestation of territory, that sort of thing, not just that, you know, oh, Cuchulain's mate was here and he was turned into a crow. That becomes mythology. Heroic associations would be closer to where even the deposition of what we've found and battered up things that we've found. There's a lot of weapons found around Tara's screen, for example, and that's supposed to be where there was a great final battle between one monarch who wanted to be a monarch. He may be the disgruntled princeling of Tacitus, who wants a Roman legion to come over to help him beat hell out of Ireland, but we don't know. But in the pseudo-histories, he's referred to as Tuathail Teachmar, and that word in Irish means legitimate leader. So it's more of a title than it is actually anything else. But so that's just to differentiate. The peculiar one that was found at that was the early ecclesiastical sites, which seemed to suggest that there was certainly the church, whenever it came in the 400s AD, seemed to actually replace the old order of power. So I threw up on a GIS model to see where the hotspots of TAC would be. And you can see the mouth of the band there is quite a hotspot. And there's a line that goes right down through sort of the middle of Ireland, running straight down from Lough Neagh. There's another big band of a heat map that goes across Ireland. And interestingly, it cuts off exactly where the great Richard Warner of Irish archaeology calls the metalworking area. What's happening down Munster, I have no idea. Get back to me in 2 years when I'm nearer the end of the project. But you'll notice over at Enniskillen there, in the west of Northern Ireland, there's another wee hot spot as well. So I went back to the great Celtic studies scholars, people like Owen MacNeill from the beginning of the 20th century. I went back to O'Donovan, and also more modern people like Stephen Berg, who has a lot to say about the Sliane. And the Sliane are the 5 big roads of Ireland. And just for fun, I used Owen MacNeill's theoretical points for where the Sliane cut through, all 5 of them. And those wee lines that you see on the map are, and there's the legend there that shows you as well, which roads they are. And lo and behold, the TAC seemed to conform very strongly. Even after we ran it through statistical tests. Enniskillen is a wee bit of an outlier there. I don't know what's going on there. But it seemed to conform very, very strongly with the pattern of these 5 prehistoric roads that gradually became, most of them are based on eskers, high dry land. And of course, in a muddy, peaty, wet country like Ireland, that's important stuff to both walk on and ride on. So taking that as a template, I started to actually throw up maps of distribution of things that you guys, I think it was talked about early, the ideal grave in early Iron Age. And I wanted to see how would we conform to that? You're looking at weapons, especially lovely wee spearheads. You're looking at personal decorations like fibula and swords. So to actually use those 3 categories at the moment, bear with me, I will be adding more. The project's only 2 months old, so it's only a baby. And so the swords, whenever I put them through to compare to the pattern of TAC and the roads, there really isn't there's no great pattern there at all at the moment. But there are some grey-lit swords that have to be added, and all of this could change. But there's no real... You seem to get things betwixt and between. Although I will point out, the hotbed for swords seems to be up at Liston Crocker. See the wee dot as you reach the most northerly point there? That's a cranog or wetland platform that is now becoming very much the focus of a lot of my attention, which may run from the end of the Bronze Age right through in the early medieval period. So it's going to be quite a frisky one to research. So we'll have to see what happens through that. Fibula. Now that's a very different kettle of fish altogether. It seems to confirm very, very strongly the road pattern, if you're to go with that. Also, the fibula, look how it starts to extend west across to Enniskillen. That little blue dot that sits up there at the west of the north of Ireland. Still, nobody can explain what's going on down in Munster. But certainly the bigger squares seem to suggest where there's multiples. That was the only way I could indicate that there's certainly more than 3 or 4 fibulae or brooch or whatever that's actually there. So, spearheads. Now, again, you'll see up in the northwest cluster there, that's Lisna Crocker again. There's an absolute plethora of absolutely fabulous little spearheads, which we don't have a clue what date they are. This was a site that was excavated in the 19th century, the very beginning of the 20th, and nobody knows where half of the goodies are. That's, at the moment, one of my main jobs, because if we manage to find the whole goodies, we might actually be able to start tracking down which belong to the earliest phases. We know that there are, in fact, late Bronze Age objects there. We know that there must be early Iron Age objects there. It's a case of now of teasing out which ones are which. And could there possibly be burials in that area? It's on a site where 3 platforms, which then would be crannogs, and then would become early medieval crannogs, all join. It's at the merging of 3 rivers, and there's 3 sites. It's quite, and now it's a housing estate, just to discuss to everybody about that. But yeah, there's a whole lot of them up there. And again, the spears seem to conform, and look, lo and behold, you've also got something happening down in Munster. Now, obviously, we don't know what alloys these are being made of, but that's where the direction of the work is going in, and what typologies, and are things going to turn up to be a lot earlier? That's the only way we're going to be able to find out what phases things are on. So here's me at the edge of Western Europe, and also at the edge of the time limit that all you folks are dealing with, in the fact that I'm at the very, very end of the Iron Age. And that's simply because we don't know what's going on. The only thing we've got firm at the moment is the very end of the Irish Iron Age. We know that it's a time of upheaval, and there's a big emphasis on weaponry and mobility. Now, Katrina Becker from University of Cork has been doing phenomenally good work on, she's just been awarded work for IRC as well, looking at the landscapes of animals and Iron Age. And she came up with a brilliant line, which I love, which was freewheeling cowboys of the Iron Age out patrolling their cattle. I think she hasn't got quite the whole picture. I think she's certainly there with a lot of it, but not entirely. The cattle are the thing that perhaps Iron Age Ireland, Bronze Age Ireland, cattle is currency. That's where the money is. That's how you say that you got that dollar bill, by saying that you've got the cattle. That's your power. Hence, you've got things like the Tyne Boculaga, which is all based upon cattle raids. I'm going to suggest something to you, and maybe this is the Belfast girl in me. Whenever you find that there's no bodies to be found, so you have to actually suggest exactly what may be going on with missing persons. I think what we may be looking at are not so much cowboys as patrols. Patrolling along these proto-roads, for want of a better word, which were supposedly created by 2 successive high kings, according to the AFM. We know that especially the end of the Iron Age in Ireland, and perhaps even actually into the BC, is rife with civil wars and constant contesting of power. Now, the dates are wobbly because these are stories that were told and retold and retold. But if you go and you watch the film with J-Lo in it, where she's a housemaid and she marries Ben Affleck, but she did end up in the end of it all, it's still the story of Cinderella. The core stories are still there. And that perhaps is the important thing to remember about the Annals of the Four Masters, the Dinshenkas, the Laber na Hydra, all of the Irish texts. The dates, of course, are wobbly, because it's somebody telling a cleric in the 7th or 8th century about what they heard from their granda, who heard it from their great-granda. So it goes into all kinds of layers. But certainly there's much to defend, because they have this focus upon mobility. They have the focus upon territory. And how do we know this? The Annals of the Four Masters very precisely gives AD 123. I don't believe that for a start. But this is a quote from it. On the night of Con's birth were discovered 5 principal roads to Tara, which never were observed until then. These are their names: the Slí Asal, the Slí Malura, the Slí Colón, the Slí Mór, and the Slí Dala. Slí Mór is that which is called the Escar Riara. And if anybody here, by the way, just as to break the third wall, to say, if anybody thinks that sounds a wee bit like the Dalriada, you're on. The division line of Ireland into 2 parts between Con and Owen Moore. Now that's the O'Donovan translation of 1856. And the one thing I found with O'Donovan is, like several people along life's highway of these old translations, he's very seldom wrong. Now, that sounds all very mystical and very Lord of the Rings and Celtic myth and elves and God knows what. But the nuance of the story when it's actually emphasised suggests the roads were completed on the child's birth. And he's the great-grandson, I think it is, or the grandson of Tuathail Teachmar. And his father, Phelim the lawgiver, basically orders a consolidation of roads. That would not suggest that they're supernatural, but that they were hard graft. And the reason for the division given by the Slí Mór is the hostility between Owen Moore of Munster and the descendants of Tuathail Teachmar, who of course traced his ancestry right back into the Bronze Age because he was like that. The division resulted in a battle in which Owen and his Iberian ally were killed. So O'Donovan had considered the battle site as being modern Molini near Tullamore in County Offaly. And there are lots and lots of little hillocks which are described in it. And he says that's where the burials are. But there's no human remains there, but there's been an awful lot of artifacts in that area. We don't know what's exactly. That's one of the things which I'm looking at. So, memorialisation has been one of the big themes of this. And I'm going to put something out to you. It's just an idea that I'm throwing out here today. That memorialisation for the people of the Iron Age, the elite, may have actually been more important than where their burial was. At the very beginning, where I'd said that there was a possibility, one of the theories that have been put out, I think it was actually by Richard Warner, was that excarnation and disposal of bones. You had the memorialisation with objects, but you don't have with the actual remains. I'd actually be a little bit more pragmatic about this, but again, this is the Belfast coming out in me to say that if these were patrols, they were ambushed, the bodies may be covered over in snow until at another part of Ireland where they're from. This is a period where there's a lot of wild animals. There's not going to be a hell of a lot to be found. You just know that maybe they died somewhere along the route because the survivors may be told about that. And when we look at those micro hoards, are we looking at roadside shrines? I know that I've travelled through Austria, I've travelled through Greece, and you get lots of these lovely wee roadside shrines where people leave things of memory to do with the person. If somebody was a footballer, you'll get footballs or little statuettes and things. We noticed this a lot through COVID. My partner and myself went down one day to Ballynoe Stone Circle and just outside Downpatrick. And it's a beautiful, if you've never been, you probably should go, because you have to go down through a very ancient holloway of very, very ancient blackthorns, right straight down. Looks like it's taking you into fairyland. And right down the whole length, the photograph you see there is a photograph apparently of a child who died of COVID. And there was a nurse also who died of COVID herself. Now, they're not buried there, but this was a place that community-wise, memorial-wise, is intrinsically tied in with these people. Their ashes are not at Ballynoe Stone Circle. They're buried somewhere in Downpatrick, but they are remembered there by the people who brought objects. This one, as I say, was a child. There was a little tiny deer statue. There was little teddy bears. And all sorts of wee things that would have pertained to the child of 4 or 5 that she was. And the hypothesis I'm looking at the moment, and I have to speak here for the entirety of the Iron Age because we don't have an idea yet where it begins, where's the middle, and where's the end. So I have to look at it just simply as a big amorphous picture at the moment until we start to get some extra ideas coming through. Maybe it's where the dead are is less important than remembering them. And out of the cremations and burials that we do have, and incidentally, there seems to be an unfair amount that appear to be female, which made me go, I wonder. I'd like to see how many can actually be gendered. Which ones are male or female, which ones may be old or young. We're up against it regarding, obviously, with cremations, and a lot of them are in really bad condition as well. But there might be a couple of inhumations which we might get lucky with. So the people who died in their beds, for whatever reasons, are they the ones that we have actually found the remains? Like the jet-setter woman from Northern Britain or Southern Britain, we aren't quite sure where she's from, who's buried just outside Newtownards, beside the beach. That's the Colloque one, where she's got rings from Northern Britain and she's got brooches from Southern Britain, and she's got a mirror that looks as if it might in fact be from over this direction. We don't know. So are they in fact the people who had the privilege, the elite, who had the privilege of dying in their beds? Because don't forget, by the end of the Iron Age, if I'm right, now who knows at this stage, if they were in fact patrol, military, cavalry, I think it was talked about the Knights of Iron earlier. They would in fact be immortalized within legend anyway. Their mortality is connected now to the story, the spoken word, the Tyne, the Labyrinth of Hudra, the Annals of Ulster, all of those stories that got passed down and down and down, and we still know their names today: Cornwall Carnoch, Cuchulainn, all of that. Whenever the early medieval scribes recorded their stories, maybe that's their best memorial. We don't know when these people are existing. That's my job now for the next 2 years. I hope that if I get to see you all within that time, I'll have updates on it, because at the moment all we can do is a broad sweep of picture. It's been delightful here to see the themes of memorialisation and also of mobility, and it's given me much to think about and much to refine my thoughts with. And for that, I thank absolutely everyone who's spoken today as well. Thank you for having me. That's where we are at the moment. Thank you.